Good morning, good afternoon to our attendees. We are going to wait a few minutes to let the colleagues joining us. We have 50 participants. That's it. Very good. Okay, I suppose we should start. Again, welcome to everybody from the East. I notice we have colleagues from Japan. From the center, we have a lot of Europeans. And from the West, we have even colleagues from South America. So it's a very distributed audience for this afternoon European time. We are going to speak about clinical applications for Idmp. And I'm going to introduce our speaker in a short while. But the first purpose for my introduction is to remind you about a few rules for this virtual meetings. The rules are mostly the same every time we speak. That means that the participants are on mute. They have the possibility to ask, and they are invited actually, to ask questions in the Q&A facility. Avoid using the chat box, please. Q&A is more appropriate for exchange. If you have the chance, the opportunity to speak, please keep concise. If you don't have this possibility to speak, you nevertheless can show your approval, especially when you see the Q&A facility. You will see that you can show your interest in a question which has been raised by somebody. We are going to ask you to respond to a questionnaire at the end of this webinar. To activate the Q&A facility, you move a bit the mouse on your screen. You probably will not see the picture here, but you will see a function bar probably on the bottom of the screen. Sometimes it's on the top. And on that bottom bar, you see the Q&A button. If you activate that Q&A button, you can ask a question such as what Robert Segway did here on the top. Can I ask you a question? And then people from the speaker or our panelists may answer your question. Sometimes the question will be also, or in addition, answered orally. And as I said before, you can show your approval about a question by clicking on the thumb up. And that's, if we have many questions, that brings your preferred question on the top of the list. The security is our priority. Each of the participants has received a personal password and access. We expect that the participants don't share this access to anybody. Once we would discover that people do so, we would ask more security because we can improve the security, but it's a bit cumbersome for the participants. So now we have a good level of security, assuming that everybody respects the rule and don't share the passwords sent to each one. The session is recorded on YouTube. It is online now. That means running online now. You have here the link to access the Unicom channel on YouTube. So you can see this webinar during the presentation, but also the previous one. And as I said before, you will be asked to share some feedback with us with a questionnaire that will be subject of an email after this meeting. We have many people on the stage this afternoon. 3 speakers. And in a sequence, it will be first Robert van der Stichele, who is a professor at the University of Ghent, but he is also Work Package 1 member and Work Package 8 member or co-chair. So Robert van der Stichele is going to introduce the subject this afternoon. Then we have Mohammad Nouri Sharibak, and he is working at Oslo at the WHO Competence Center they have there, and he's a specialist about ATC, pardon me, and DDD. He's going to speak about ATC and the relationship with Idmp after the introduction of Robert. Last, Malin Fladvad, she's also in a WHO Competence Center, this time in Uppsala, Sweden. And she is responsible for the drug dictionary there. And she's going to give us an insight on what is going on regarding the pharmaceutical product identification production. We have 4 panelists carefully selected to help us to have a conversation. Some of them are very known in this group, assuming you have visited us several times. Annette Rosema, she works at CBG, so the National Competent Authority in Netherlands. She is responsible for the work package 2 in Unicom, addressing substances. And she is also responsible for substances at CBG and the European level. Olof Lagerlund is working at the Competence Center, the WHO Competence Center in Uppsala. He is also very much focusing on substances with his expertise. Jean-Gonzague Fontaine, he is working at GSK Vaccine. He is one of the few Idmp specialists we have on the industry side. I mean, the few there are, but he is certainly one of the most known, although, as you can see, he's a very young man. He has grown in audience in the last, I would say, 2 years. Deepak Kalra is a professor in London and also invited professor in the University of Ghent. He was a medicinal doctor, so a practitioner in a couple of years ago, and he has been selected because of this skill as a practitioner to complete the panel. So we have not only regulators or related functions, industry, but also a user. And we are going to speak about clinical application of Idmp. That's the reason. As I already mentioned, I repeat that, and I will say that at the end of this meeting, you have a feedback form, which is quoted here. I suppose nobody can copy that so quickly, this hyperlink, but you will receive that with an email possibly tomorrow. And we really appreciate the responses you may share with us. Now I'm passing the floor to Robert van der Stichele, and I'm hiding myself for the time being. Thank you. Robert?
Thank you, Christian, and welcome to you all, and good afternoon. Thank you, the organizers, for the opportunity to speak on the steps to make Idmp relevant for clinical care, and focusing in that on the importance of linking the pharmaceutical product identifier, the PhPID, the global identification number for medicinal products, to international drug classifications. Next. This is also a little bit a report on what has been done in Work Package 8 in Unicom, halfway through the project. Work Package 8 is focusing on IDMP in clinical care. What has been achieved? What is our motivation to focus on the procedure for PhPID production? What were the breakthroughs with regard to PhPID production, with regard to substance, dose, form, and strength? Something in the two next parts on the role of UMC and Oslo, and then looking at applications in drug information and decision support of all this work. Next. First, the achievement in Work Package 8. Yes, next one. We have some interesting deliverables in Work Package 8 on clinical care, on IDMP and research, on IDMP and pharmacovigilance, and IDMP and pharmacogenetics. The first three approved internally, the last one in pending approval, but also already readable. Work Package 8 has focused on the minimal data set for PHP level 4 production and on resolving the issues in the description of substance, dose, form, and strength to feed the algorithm that produces the global pharmaceutical product, because we want to start to think about concrete applications to be developed in the next half of Unicom project. Next. So what is the motivation to focus on the production of the PhPID? Next. Well, first of all the pilots in Unicom need sufficiently large data sets for experimenting concrete projects that demonstrate the value of IDMP. It's to enable the cross-border pilots in Work Package 5 and 7, to feed the ambitions demonstrators in Work Package 8, to realize concrete patient-facing apps and not just mock-ups, to support initial steps of readiness for NCAs for IDMP. There has been a fear for delay in the official channels. There is some delay in the EU implementation guide, where up till now no mention has been made yet of the procedures to produce PhPID. Globally, there is a consultation initiated in the global IDMP working group between FDA, EMA, and WHO UMC, and we'll hear more about that, but that is in the initiating process, ongoing. And of course, many of the NCAs have been confronted with the COVID-19 burden. So there is a possibility that before the end of the Unicom project in 2023, there will be no sufficiently big data sets for medicinal products for at least a minimum number of countries. That risk is present and we have to remediate it. The remedial actions have been by making the Unicom pilot product list, which is a restricted list of 35 exemplary substances. They have been defined and chosen. And for each of these substances, a collection of relevant modifiers and different code systems have been produced. And this has been done with the help of Work Package 2, the EU substance cleansing team, and also partners from Work Package 9. There has been a proposal for the development of an IDMP fire service solution that focuses on the full implementation of IDMP within NCAs, focusing on a few products based on evolving versions of the EU implementation guide, but focusing on the full implementation. And another proposal in Work Package 8 and 1 for collaboration with WHO UMC, which would take advantage of the pilot product that has been run with the FDA and focusing on the procedures of a small set of variables that is needed for PhPID production. And also, there has been an establishment of minimal data sets for cross-border e-health pilots, and basically they include substance, dose, form, and strength as the principal variables in that minimal data set. Next. So we will talk about the initiatives within Work Package 8 to resolve the remaining issues, as identified in the gap analysis for substance, dose, form, and strength, on the creation of a repository of PhPID and minimal data for the Work Package 6 software factory, starting with the 35 substances on the Unicom product list, for a collection of national products from a number of countries, and to provide data sets to the pilots of Unicom on a short notice, mid-2022. And we have heard from the kickoff meeting of work package 5, 6, and 7 that this is actually June 2022. That means 5 months from now, which is a relatively short period. Also, we need to create a link from the PhPID to international drug classifications later. In the second part, Mohammed Shari Kalbat will talk about the link of with ATC, and Malin will talk about the activities in WHO UMC. Next slide. So, coming to the remaining issues in PhPID production. Yeah. First, let us show that if you start from a medicinal product in country A and you can link it to its PhPID. Yes, the next slide. You have to make the link to define the PhPID. You need to know exactly the substance ID and moiety or moiety plus modifier and its ID. And the ID is determined by the coding systems, and there are several coding systems. We need to choose one. You need to identify the dose form, and the standard says ADQM. But it's not an easy task to standardize to ADQM. And then you need to express strength. And if you've done that according to the rules, there is a mechanical procedure, an algorithm to create a number. Next. And that number can then be linked also to the ATC classification, and from there to other international classifications. And it's possible to have an intermediary step. Next one. An intermediate aggregation level based on ontology of substance and dose form that would be useful for fair substitution and for INN prescribing. Next. So if we have such a PhPID and it's linked to one country and the similar medicinal products from different brands in one country, but also to similar products in other countries, when this number links all these similar products, but carries in itself also an inherent information of the reference substance, the dose form and the strength, and the characteristics. But also potentially the link to ATC. Next. But it's important to understand that this is not just a number, but a number related to a precise reference substance, a precise dose form in ADQM, a precise strength. Next. And the dose form itself has another wealth of information inside it: the basic dose form, the state of matter, the release characteristics, the intended site, the administration method, and we can profit from that in many ways. Next. It can help us to link to INN instructions, prescription instructions, and to the ATC code. Yes, and so it can be, with all that information, you can link medicinal product from any country with that number. Next. In order to get there, there are some remaining issues. Next. Next one. First, substance. Next one. No, one too many. There has been great work done in the European substance management system by the cleansing team for the chemical substance almost finished, and for the other complex substances like proteins and biologicals ongoing. Great work on terminology of substance, weeding out the synonyms and spelling differences, differentiating between substance and reference substance when needed, to determine whether it's a moiety with or without a modifier, and which is the precise active ingredient, and then identify, if there is a modifier, all other relevant modifiers of a substance if appropriate, and this based on a reality check for a number of occurrences in adverse events reports. And that's very thorough work that has almost reached completion and from which we can all benefit. Next. Here you have an example of two kinds of substances with the role of precise active ingredient. Amlodipine basilat, you need to specify the modifier. For carbamazepine doesn't have a modifier, and the moiety is the substance with a precise active ingredient. For if you look at moieties, ionized moiety amlodipine is without a modifier, and that is different than the case of carbamazepine, who does not have a modifier, and where it's the moiety that is the precise active ingredient. So that needs to be distinguished, and that's not an easy task, and must be brought to conclusion for all the chemical substances. Next. A distinction is made, and that's a semantic issue, between the meanings of the same term that represent different concepts, and we have chosen the example of amlodipine. If you use the term amlodipine, you can refer, it is possible that you refer to a physical reality, the chemical molecule. The second meaning is that it is a collection of modified substances, the collection of basilate, mesylate, and maleate. And it can also mean, the third meaning, a collection of medicinal products, not of substances, but of products that contain any of these three modified substances. When you look at modified substances, it can again be either the physical reality or the class name for the group of medicinal products containing the specific modified substance. And the fact that you can use the same terms for the different concepts had led to much confusion, and that needs to be cleared out by different coding systems. Next. There's also a problem in dealing with combinations of medicinal products. Different approaches are possible. We can have databases that separate classes for singles and for combinations, databases where the singles are a subset of the combinations, and then a database where singles and combinations are in one class and linked to a database of substances with the role of precise active ingredients. All these different solutions have been tested, and different solutions can fit to different use cases. Next. The dose form. Next. The choice, it has been very important to make the choice between manufactured dose form and administrable dose form. The standard says that for PhPID production, it's the administrable dose form that needs to be used, and the problem is that it is not very explicit in ADQM, and it has to be made explicit, and work for that is underway. There's still some debate about what will be used, the full ADQM, the granular ADQM, or combination of characteristics as is proposed in the pilot with the FDA. The choice of the coding system needs to be established. Will it be the European ADQM coding system, or will it be a global coding system? That all needs to be determined. It is possible to create an ontology of dose forms based on ADQM, looking at the characteristics. And I think we should acknowledge that there is a big need for training for industry and regulatory experts to standardize the dose forms to ADQM, which is not an easy task, and where there's a lot of inter-rater variability. Next. For strength. Here the problem is to harness the intricate relationship between the expression of strength on the one hand and the substance and dose form on the other hand. The substance you need to the substance and the dose form will determine the way strength is expressed. Next. For substance, it's the choice between substance versus reference substance, the moiety with or without the modifier, if there is any. For dose form, there are several patterns of dose form that share the similar business rules to express strength, and basically strength, and that can help to decide whether strength needs to be expressed as a concentration or a presentation strength. Next. Next is about the creation of a PhPID. We have in several countries of Europe, in all the 27 member states, drug databases. In some countries, several databases from different organizations. And they can all, when Idmp is implemented, linked to the same pharmaceutical product when they are similar. And that link to the pharmaceutical product will also mean that they are linked to the inherent information, the exact substance, the exact dose form and strength, and characteristics of these dose forms. That all can be used. Next one. Can be used to create a versional medicinal product group, which is mechanically constructed from the PhPID level 4 based on an ontology of substance and dose form. It can aggregate similar PhPIDs for the purpose of INN prescribing and fair substitution. Next, this can be linked to the ATC, including the route of administration. And it can be a one-to-one relationship, and then to other ontologies. From there, we can go to semantic interoperability to the other clinical drug classifications. Next. That's the final slide. What are the planned clinical applications in Work Package 8? Well, we want to make some demonstrators on how European decision support systems developed in one country can be connected to the medicinal drug dictionaries of Europe, connecting drug information centers to healthcare providers, caregivers, and patients of all the member states, connecting European digital platforms for teaching, prescribing, and medication management to physicians, pharmacists, and nurses of all the member states, and making the cross-border projects work in relatively short term. We're referring here to the e-prescription projects, the e-dispensing projects, and the project for e-international patient summary. Basically, it's an attempt to demonstrate that it is possible to make evidence, clinical information, prescriptions, and patients cross the border. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Robert, for this introduction. I think the audience has understood that the spectrum is wide and we are making interesting progresses in various spaces. And one of the progress we are making will be part of Mohamed's presentation. And Mohamed, I give you the floor immediately. Voilà.
Thank you so much, Christian, for kind introduction, and thank you for this opportunity. Please, next slide. So I hope to be able to communicate some information about the ATC-DDD system, even it is very brief, because we have been talking about this presentation ATC-DDD before in this community of practices. I will talk a little bit about the use of the ATC-DDD system and how and where the system is incorporated in different systems in Norway. And at last, I'm going to give some summary and some concluding remarks. Next, please. So ATC stands for Anatomical Therapeutic Chemical Classification, and the DDD for Defined Daily Dose. ATC-DDD is a WHO recommended standard, as you know, with hierarchic drug classes based on anatomy, therapeutic use, pharmacology, and chemical properties. It is 5-level system, and the DDDs are connected to route of administration. The system is central methodological tool for drug utilization, research and monitoring, and the field of pharmacoepidemiology. DDDs, they are a unit of measurements and quantify drug consumption. And the system is maintained by the ATC-DDD Center, of course, under the guidance of WHO appointed experts. And it is good to know that new ATC codes and DDDs are assigned on request by pharmaceutical companies, health authorities, and other users of the ATC classification system. Next slide, please. So the ATC-DDD Center encourage all the stakeholders to incorporate official DDDs in their systems as well. And the reason for this is that DDDs are a unit of measurement, independent of strength, package, and price, and very useful tools for good indicators for consumption, both on national and international levels. Next slide, please. Here you see a triangle between disease, population, and drug, which illustrates how these three different things and how this different science arise between these three boxes: drug, population, and disease. Atcd is the tool we use in the field of pharmacoepidemiology and the drug utilization research, and that is why I have highlighted in that colored ring. And please note that the purpose of the Atcd system is to collect and improve drug use. And it is with this purpose that we have in mind that we make decisions about both assignments and alterations. Next slide, please. So our vision and ambition lies in being an international language for drug utilization and monitoring. We have been for almost 5 decades with this system, and I hope we can maybe continue for 5 decades more. Who knows that? Next slide, please. So in Norway, as many other European countries, is Atcd system incorporated in many systems and registries. I have a list of 6 examples here, and I will get back to the first 2 examples in more detail. Norwegian Product Register, which is a cooperation between many stakeholders, prescribing support system administered by Norwegian Medicines Agency. A number of national health registries and databases have Atcd. Electronic patient records, our medicine catalog in Norway, and a handbook of Norwegian Medicine Handbook, which is used very much in Norway. So in addition, internationally, you know that the system is incorporated in medicinal dictionaries. I would like to name WHO Drug Global, which is produced by Collaborating Center in Uppsala, Sweden, and Atcd as well is fused in important international drug textbooks such as Martindale. Next slide, please. So this Norwegian Product Register, which was my first example, this is a cooperation between Norwegian Pharmacy Association and the 3 main drug wholesalers in Norway. And they have a lot of collaboration with Norwegian Medicines Agency, Norwegian Health Economics Administration, and our Atcd Center. This is how the Norwegian Product Register is maintained, updated, and administered. And this updated register is distributed twice monthly to pharmacies and pharmaceutical wholesalers and other subscribers. And next slide, please. And our center quality assure this list of products twice monthly as well, for making sure that ATC and DDD is chosen for the right product, the right ATC. So here is a piece of a list you have here. It is 13 columns from left to right. I can go through them. The first one is medicinal product packed identifier, which is we call it sometimes for article number. We have the name of product, article name, quantity, unit, strength, ATC code, substance, DDD, unit of measurement for that DDD, route of administration. And we have this column named content, which is the content of the active substance with the same unit, of course, as a measurement of the DDD. And please allow me to explain this one a little bit. So if we look at the first product, which first row, which is a Classite mixture, it contains 5 grams of the active substance clarithromycin, which has a DDD of 0.5 gram. So by dividing the content to DDD value, you have the DDD per package, which is in this case is 10 DDDs. So we have content for all products in Norway where the substance has a DDD, and this is how we can have a good overview over the consumption in terms of DDDs. And we have 3 more columns here, which is dose form, a confirmation column, and a column where we can comment any changes or other matters. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the unit of measurements. We have the 8 in the ATC DDD system and the routes, 8 unit of measurement and 10 DDD routes. And 10 administration routes, sorry. So as you see, it is far from so detailed as Idmp standards, but has been sufficient for the purpose of the system. Next slide, please. Here is a busy picture. I try to explain it. It's from our search tool in our official internet web page. I have done 2 queries here. One for the painkiller and anti-inflammatory diclofenac, and one for the calcium channel blocker amlodipine, which Robert talked also about. So search for diclofenac in the left-hand side of the figure resulted in 3 different ATC first classes, D, M, and S, and 6 different 5th level classes. So routes of administration and use, dermal versus oral, and combinations are the reasons behind these 6 ATC 5th level codes. And these codes are in 37 packages we have per date in Norway containing diclofenac, and there are a majority of them are single preparation products. But on the right-hand side, I have the search for the substance amlodipine, where you see we have 31 different ATC 5th level codes. All of them are in the same ATC 1st level code, which is cardiovascular system. And one 5th level is amlodipine alone, and 30 are combination products. And these result in total of 48 packages of different products in Norway. Next slide, please. So this is a picture from a search tool at Norwegian Medicine Agency. It's a busy picture, I'm sorry. I have searched for diclofenac products in the Norwegian market, as you see, and I have marked it in the left-hand side. We have 37 packages with diclofenac in Norway. All of them are connected to their ATC, and they have also altogether a 6-digit number, which is the medicinal product pack identifier in Norway. So, which is in the next last column. And if we go to the next picture, please, you see the same search, just I have chosen another worksheet, which is exchangeable packages. And as you see here, doctors and pharmacies can see which packages are identical to exchange between in case of shortage or other price issues. Next slide, please. We have some challenges with ATC DDD as all other systems. Here I mention a couple of examples of these challenges. For instance, combinations of old substances and some national products such as cough and cold, vitamins, minerals, where the ATC name does not include all the active substances. However, this is a diminishing challenge, as for the last 10 to 15 years, we list all the active substances in the product, as you saw for the amlodipine example. And we have some challenges assigning codes to substances without a name, INN, or USAN. So, and we ask this question or challenge, is this maybe the same challenges will be for IDMPs, as I have noticed here. Next slide, please. So the system, Atcd system, is not made for the purpose of identifying medicine packages as Idmp and PhP Id are, but the system has been a cornerstone for reliable drug data for research and decision making in Nordic countries, alongside especially this unique medical product pack identifier, and it's kind of IDMP light for us. And the DDDs are independent of strength, package, and price, and the number of DDDs in each package should be defined for the products where DDDs are assigned for, and they are used for comparing and comparing consumption over time in different countries. Please, next. So, Atcd DDD should be integrated part of long-term development of IDMPs and PhP IDs and other health systems, and such as electronic patient journals and registries. They are already in the species and in national drug databases and many other e-health systems. Idmp PhP ID defines packages according to these 5 ISO standards in very detailed manner, but Atcd DDD facilitates aggregation in therapeutic, pharmacological, and chemical groups which are needed for retrieval of information and statistical purposes. And we think that ATC for drug statistics and consumption purposes, together with PhP ID for detailed identification of pharmaceutical products, will give a synergy in the field of drug related e-health. And to the next slide, please. And the last point is actually my conclusion as well, and a simplified picture of what we are planning, that will make the ATC classification and DDD as always, and route of administration, and the WHO Collaborating Center in Uppsala makes this PhP ID 4 levels, and in cooperation and together we provide this for NCAs and other e-health systems. So this presentation was basically to support the awareness that the alignment of ATC DDD and IDMP will be very important for the future, and further harness of good data for monitoring of drug data for research and cross-country activities. So next, please. So thank you for your attention, and please contact us by this email if you have things to discuss, questions, or any advice. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. But you don't need to go directly to this email address. You may also use the chat box, the Q&R facility if you want to have on-the-spot answer to some questions. Mohammed, when you started, you mentioned that we had already a webinar, a committee of expertise, where ATC and DDD was addressed. It is, for me, a good reminder to attract the attention of the audience about the Unicom channel on YouTube, and I think it is worth to have an eye on this. We have noticed that several of these recordings are visited intensively afterwards. So thank you for this opportunity, Mohammed. And thank you also for this presentation, which gives the link from, I would say, IDMP and the current practice. And now I suggest we move on with the next presentation by Malin Fadbad, and she will bring us around the procedure for PHP generation. Procedure, that is a specific word, and maybe my understanding would be it's not necessarily a procedure, but it is a methodology, or it is a guidance. And Malin, you are going to explain us what it is.
Thank you, Christian. Yeah, I think what we're talking about are, of course, methodologies, business rules, and also best practices and that's what we need to actually produce global PhPIDs. So thank you for the invitation to this webinar and to speak about the PhPID generation. I will start with an overview of the achievements and plans for global PhPID, and then move on to the PhPID production as been proposed recently. So in 2019, UMC as a collaborating center was endorsed as the future maintenance organization for global PhPID, and a plan was set out to explore the use cases, processes, and best practices, including pilots for PhPID generation. So shortly after that, the Unicom project started, and then the pandemic hit, so creating an even greater need for global harmonization of medicinal product information. That was also an urge to start piloting the PhPIDs, and there were 2 different pilots performed, one in the Unicom setting and one together with the US FDA based on needs from the ISO working group 6. In parallel with this, also a global vaccines project were pursued together with FDA and EMA to investigate the global harmonization of vaccine substance information and processes for data exchange. So collecting all this information, we could then summarize a number of findings. I will talk about some of these today. But then moving forward, it was very clear that there were more investigations needed. So in the fall of 2021, the global Idmp working group was formed to continue to explore the global Idmp implementation, and in particular the PhPID. Next, please. So this presentation will focus on the PhPID generation as it has been suggested so far. And according to the ISO Idmp standards, the PhPID is defined as a set of 4 levels where the substance identification is combined in level 2 and 3 with the strength and dose form. And then in the 4th level, you have all of these, so the substance, strength, and the dose form. The focus in the previous form and the currently planned studies has been on marketed products and to construct the PhPID on the most specific level, so the level 4. And applying the ISO standards to global PhPID may seem like a very simple process. But as all of you know, medicinal products, they show a really great variety, and therefore harmonization is very challenging. So what has been done in this pilot is that we've been looking at product definitions from different countries. And what we have seen is that there is really little harmonization regarding the different elements for substance, strength, and dose form. And currently there is therefore a need for a manual validation of the product data. An automatic assignment of global PhPID may be possible moving forward, and I hope that there will be groups of pharmaceutical products that may have a more automatic assignment when we have been able to define the business rules. Next, please. So if we first look at the identification of substance, the substance identifier is generated by identifying the active ingredients in the pharmaceutical product by using a set of minimal fields as has been defined by ISO. So these minimal fields are then documented in an SRS system in order to set the structure for all of these elements. So if the active ingredient is a salt form, for example, the active moiety will also be defined and used in the PhPID generation. In the case, as you can see on the example on this slide, the pharmaceutical product contains a mixture of 2 different substances. So both of them will be identified and each will have a generated global substance identifier that can be used as an input for the PhPID. For the naming of the substances, if the INN name is used, that will be the one that is preferred to use in the SRS system. And if it's not, a standardized expression of the substance name is identified. And here there's been a lot of work that's been done, for example, in the EU SRS project, working with substances and the naming. So in this example on the slide, you can see that the fast-acting insulin Lispro has an INN name, and while the more long-acting insulin Lispro-protamine does not. So then to actually generate a global substance identifier, a proposed substance ID generation algorithm has been set up using a 13-character long text consisting of a qualifier, a unique text, and a checksum. Next, please. So then if we move over to strength and the expression of strength, in order to normalize the input and ensure consistent use of strength expression and units, a number of patterns were developed that would decide how the strength would be expressed for different products. So for example, for a tablet, an expression would be used as 10 milligram per tablet. In the case that you see here on the slide for a liquid, the strength concentration was used and expressed as per unit volume. And the value of the denominator would in these cases always be an implicit 1. If the strength concentration per unit volume is not available according to the product information, the strength for PhPID input will be calculated from the strength per Newton volume of the container. And the reason for this is just to harmonize. If you want to create a global PhPID, you need to harmonize this information based on all the similar products globally. Other rules for the numerical values currently applied are that we use the range of 1 to 999 with 2 value figures, resulting in, for example, an input of PhPID of 100 micrograms rather than 0.1 milligrams. Next, please. So the last part of the PhPID is the dose form. And as Robert pointed out before, there are different proposals on the table here on how to express the dose form numerically. But the current process that we have applied is to actually use a mapping from the dose form to a set of dose form characteristics as been defined by the EDQM. So the basic dose form, the administration methods, the intended size, and the release characteristics. So in the case where a precise EDQM pharmaceutical dose form is used, the mapping to the characteristics would be automatic. Next, please. So to summarize the proposed PhPID production so far, I wanted to show you this example for a Humalog Mix 50 Quick Pen. So as you have seen on the previous slides, the numerical representation for substance, strength, and dose form are defined according to the number of business rules. So based on these values, an input string is compiled, and in this case is based on the 2 substances combined, the strength of each of these substances, and the assigned dose form. So this input string is then subjected to the MD5 algorithm, which is defined as the algorithm to be used for PhPID according to the ISO standards. And this results in a PhPID, as you can see here on the bottom of the slide. Next, please. So if we now go to the bigger picture for a proposed future PhPID maintenance organization and a service with processes and governance, the following proposal have been made. So there should be a governance, including setting the service offer, setting the maintenance framework and validation process, and also including regular reviews. For the data validation, validation should be performed according to the agreed processes, and the support organization should respond to questions and escalate issues. And there should also be regular data updates, including cross-references needed for example, pharmacovigilance. For the technical support, a technical team would ensure the availability of the service from a technical perspective and also ensure access to API or user administration. To oversee the assignment and to resolve issues, it's been proposed that there should be an WHO international working group, similar to what we have for the Atcd framework. And this working group would decide on updates of the business rules and also escalate issues to, for example, ISO if there is a need for update of the standards. Next, please. So for the overarching process for global PhPID generation and maintenance, we need to establish the process flow to identify the stakeholders that would request a new PhPID and the receivers of the resulting information. We know that regulators and industry are the main stakeholders here, but we also have others like WHO in the maintenance of the global database for ICSRs. So the timing on the request will also be crucial. And we have said that the first scope for global PhPID is for marketed products. The substance information is, however, usually known earlier in the process or have already been registered in another region using, for example, an SRS system. And there would, of course, be an advantage to have that state of the assignment solved earlier in the process, however, still ensuring confidentiality of certain information regarding the substances. Next, please. So if we look a bit closer to the current proposed process, where we are also taking into account the generation of global PhPID for entire national data sets, as Robert presented earlier, there are already some proposed processes for extracting the relevant data from local registries. So the national data could most likely be handled in a similar process as for single PhPID request, using the same validation process. For substances, the ongoing harmonization effort between EU and US will give a very solid foundation for substance registration, requiring fewer new registrations, and many cases there will only be a need for mapping to a current substance identifiers. In the case where the current framework or business rule for validation can't be applied, the international working group will be consulted to solve the issues and potentially also escalate questions. When the PhPID assignment, however, is solved, the requester will have the result of the assignment and the PhPID will be published in a database. And the mechanism and technology for exchange of information with the global database of PhPID is also part of the process that are currently being investigated. Next, please. So to take the next step in the development of a consistent process and operations for a global PhPID, the global Idmp working group are kicking off 5 additional pilots to continue the work with the different elements. So here you can see an overview of these projects. So there's one for a global substance identifier, for dose form identification, the strength definition, the HL7 fire for Idmp, and also the operating model. Next, please. So for the planned pilot for substance identification, the scope that's been defined so far is to map the EU SRS EU TCT code together with the FDA UNIS and to 1 additional regional substances. And that will also be based on a set of selected chemicals in the WHO model list of essential medicines. And there's also, in addition, we should review the substance classes that are included in the ISO standards to look into the more complex scenarios, like, for example, certain biologics. And the success criteria that we need to meet is that we want to have the requirements for unique substance identification, and we want to identify and address issues, challenges, and also regional legacy substance definitions identification, and we want to propose a feasible, scalable, and efficient operating model to maintain the global substance identifier. Next, please. So then there's another pilot for the dose form identifier, and the rationale here is to ensure a consistent mapping to the EDQM characteristics for products with less granular dose form expressions. And the scope here is also to map the dose forms to another region using the dose form characteristics, and to further investigate dose form characteristics combinations, and also characteristics that have multiple values. And the success criteria for this pilot would be to identify and address issues and challenges, and to document rules to apply for proper dose form characteristics and generation of PhPID. Next, please. So moving over to strength. So the rationale with this project is to build on what has been done before in the FDA UMC pilot, and also to look into the concept of strength presentation versus strength concentration for different products. So what we want to do here is to address different representation of strength for products in different regions, and also to work with ISO to clarify the use on presentation and concentration strength. So there are some strength considerations that we've been looking at after the pilots that we had last year. And what we can see so far when we mapped all the EDQ and dose forms to the suggested patterns that we had is that it seems like the pattern framework A, B, and C are well defined, and we just need to investigate the range concentration a bit more. There are, of course, then a number of challenges. So, for example, the pattern D that we suggested, it really needs more investigation. And there may also be a need for additional patterns when strength is expressed, for example, for cells, traditional Chinese medicines, and also some animal products or components. So then we have the HL7 fire for Idmp pilot. And the scope here is to participate in the development, verification, and ballots of the HL7 fire resources related to Idmp. And the success criteria for this pilot is a successful exchange of medicinal product and substance information between the EU SRS SMS, the FDA SRS, and the UMC SRS, using HL7 fire as the underlying message technology, and then to demonstrate in HL7 fire connectatons. Next, please. So the final pilot is regarding the operating model. And here the scope is to demonstrate the consensus-based operating model for UMC as the International Maintenance Organization as an end-to-end pilot. And the success criteria here would be to actually have a process where you can have a number of selected cases that go through the whole process. So from request to publication of a global PhPID. That was actually all I had for today. So thank you, Christian, for allowing me to speak here about the PhPID. And back to you.
Thank you, Malin. Thank you to you all. And I appreciate that you thank me personally, but I'm not the only one. It's a teamwork. I have also Robert Stegway and Esther Palin with me. They are a bit in the shadow, but they are supporting by following the discussion, the written discussion. Now it's time for the panel, and I'm very happy that we have enough time for a panel discussion. So the camera come on. I will possibly, I will try to ask a few questions from the Q&A facility. But one of the questions which seemed to me quite interesting is about, wait a second that I find it again. when using the dose form from EDQM, how do you handle the fact that characteristics for dose form is not defining in such a way for PhPID? What is what you can answer to that? Maybe Robert, maybe Malin can say something about that. Robert van der Stichele, I mean.
Yes, of course. There are 2 descriptors and 4 characteristics for each dose form in IDQM. Together, they are not completely definitional. But in the pilot of FDA, a set of these characteristics, namely only a selection of 4, has been chosen and the unique combinations of these, the values of these characteristics for each dose form provide a granularity that is about half the granularity of EDQM. Less precise for identification, more relevant for clinical purposes. But they are not definitional, but they are very valuable. And in the revision of EDQM in workgroup 6, it is clearly stipulated that the status of the characteristics as being in the past purely informational will be upgraded as not being definitional, but instrumental for information technology.
Thank you, Robert. Malin, would you like to add something? Or?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think using the characteristics, I mean, the reason for that is just to ensure that we can have a global mapping to a global PhPID. And yes, of course, using the characteristics would result in less granularity, but it may also result in a feasibility. So there is always a balance there. And I think that's what we are going to look more carefully in the upcoming pilots to see. So what are the benefits and what are kind of the issues with using the characteristics.
The challenges.
Challenges.
Yes. Thank you, Malin. Another question, which was possibly moved to the resolved ones, was raised by Peter Bachmann. It's about, do we really need a procedure to create a PhPID? And that question was raised before Malin Flatvat spoke. And I think personally that she provided quite an extensive answer to that. Maybe other panelists would like to comment on it. It's not the case. Yes, Jean Gonzague.
I understand Peter's perspective here, but as we said, often is a devil in the detail, and that's why it might be difficult to have an automated algorithm. But at least if I can speak for my chapel, as we say in French, from the industry perspective, it would be valuable to have this kind of algorithm. We could implement in the system and just input the things and get the PhPID. So in some ways, we could have this PhPID already in the submission as soon as we start any procedure. And it would be also very valuable to identify, for example, a product in any kind of clinical protocol or any kind of regulatory document, or even document which is going to reach the market in like a patient leaflet or whatever. So this could be very valuable if we could put kind of, and you will like me here, Christian, a kind of data matrix where you can then jump directly to the PHP and some product information and so on. So that would be, let's say, the blue sky, but the complexity and the fact that there is a lot of detail to take into account in this may represent a challenge to really be able to achieve this automation, full automation of the PhPID.
Thank you, Jean Gonzague. I think Malin also mentioned that it is, you say blue sky, it is with a horizon, so we don't know how long it will take, but it's not a question of procedure, it is a question to give sufficient guidance so that the same method or guidance, no, same sequence of information goes into the algorithm. The algorithm is an algorithm. It's just a stupid machine to calculate. But how you organize and what are the way you express things, this is something where we have to learn more from the practice. And I think Marlene expressed herself on this quite nicely. I see Deepak would like also to say something, please.
Well, only a small point, Christian, because I think you've sort of made it in a way. I will admit that I'm not an expert on all of the details that were presented on PhPID generation. So for me, it's been a hugely educational session. But what I would say is that the reliance upon computability of clinical data is growing astronomically, and we need that in terms of supporting patient care accurately, care pathways, alerts, reminders, prompts, especially because of multimorbidity, where there is a greater risk that we introduce complexity beyond the sort of cognitive capability of the clinician in the brain. We need the computers to be smart and accurate. And then, of course, for knowledge generation, for learning, for the ability to grow research knowledge, especially in precision medicine and narrower and narrower targeted therapies, we need more and more precise information. So the accurate identification of medicines is critical to where we're going next. And what worries me is not the algorithmic part, but very much, Christian, what you said. What I didn't like about the presentations, and it's not their fault, is how complicated is the source data and how variable is the source data on which eventually you need to feed a generation of an ID. And unless you do it accurately, consistently, and repeatedly, you might risk getting different IDs. And to me, I think the issue, the message that I didn't really hear, and I don't hear much in Unicom as a project, is patient safety and risk management of this whole process. What troubles me is that we do want automation. We want to bring people and time and resources out of the equation, give the computers to do what they can do well. But until we can risk and safety assess accurate, repeatable, consistent generation of IDs planet-wide, we are in danger of giving into the computer too early. And that's my area of worry. But this is not the worry of somebody who understands the detail. This is the kind of customer worry. And therefore, I'm afraid you need to see me as an amateur in your very professional community here today. But I'm still articulating the concerns that I think clinicians, healthcare providers, patients would have, that they want to rely on more and more tools. But actually, unless we are absolutely certain planet-wide these IDs are consistent and accurate and repeatable, we can't trust what the tools will tell us.
Thank you, Deepak. Well, you added really a slice of arguments on what I wanted to share with the audience. We had also previous discussion in Work Package 1 or in other settings with our colleagues from UMC to say that the end goal is that we can automate, but until we are there, we have really to concentrate our resources and efforts in the learning process so that we can then later move to something more automatic and deserving also the needs from the industry and the needs from the NCA who don't want to have a burden to search somewhere PHP and this type of thing.
Yes, and I didn't mean to insult the presenters and say they weren't good presentations. What I really mean is they were scary presentations.
Can I add something there?
Please.
I think you're right. It's a problem that we need to have the right input data, like the substances need to be defined. And that is, well, if we look at some projects locally, you can see that they are harmonizing and you try that, but there are a number of countries. And that's one of the parts that we're going to try to do now. The safety issues are already there with different names for different substances, how they name them in China, for instance, compared to the US or INN or Africa mostly use other ones. But so we need to do that harmonization. This is part of that. So automating you can use the tools for it, but it's important to have the right input data. And that's why we want this like international working group, not just for the PhPID generation, but also for the business rules, how to handle certain like substances or the dose forms. So you're absolutely correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have another question which is addressing the European Substance Management System. In short, are this the result of the cleansing process being made publicly available? And I suppose Annette would like to answer this.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so the answer is yes. It should be soon. We were hoping to have that done by the end of last year. And I think the SMS team at EMA is now finalizing this. They will publish the results in the public domain, I think through the Unicom website. And in case of certain changes, they will also inform the marketing authorization holders of the particular changes that have an effect on the marketing authorization holders. So what the EMA have done is they implemented some sort of flag in their system so that we can always see, okay, these are the substances that have been confirmed / validated or cleansed. So that should give a sufficient insight in for end users of the data on what is the status of the substance data. And for EMA, I was just on the chat with my EMA colleagues regarding an earlier question, and they also say for them, in order to make the PhPID work, the quality of the source data is essential. So therefore, they focus at this moment on the short term to support the EOSRS team with cleansing the data, because without cleansed data, the PhPID would not be feasible, right? So I hope that is an answer to your question. So in very due course, I hope to give good news that it is available in the public domain.
Thank you, Annette. We have a pending discussion that is about this PhPID generation. And I will give now the microphone to Peter Bachmann. Peter, the floor is yours if you click on the button.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I would like to build what Annette has just said. So what we are doing in the European Union, we are applying ISO Idmp. And one of the prerequisites is we are cleaning up, for example, substances. So at the end, we have a clear nomenclature for substances which are unique identifier. Full stop. I expect EDQM is doing the same for pharmaceutical forms, whatever, for strengths, whatever. Then we are absolute clear. We are absolute well defined. If we are then using the algorithm, we get one number and it will be always the same. If you have different pharmaceutical forms, that's a regular discussion during the approval. If you don't agree, okay, then the number will be different that the company have thought, that's fine. What we need from the Uppsala Monitoring Center for a global PhPID is not a global PhPID. What we need from them is to have the concrete equivalent of a worldwide substance number to a European number. We would like to have exactly the same for the dosage form according to EDQM. If we have this, we have a simple computer mapping and the calculation could be then done automatically. We don't need the mechanism to ask, can I have a PhPID? We need to have clear maps, which are clearly mapped to each other. We have clean databases. That's all.
I think this is a clear requirement, and perhaps not everybody knows Peter Bachmann, but he's our Unicom colleague from BfArM in Germany, and he is a very known voice to propose constructive way forward. So we capture that, and I don't think it is in contradiction really with what we have said before, but we understand that we have the need to have a better communication around how these PhPID are calculated so that it can be repeated elsewhere. And that may include the mapping you were mentioning as an example, or the strict use of ADQM as an example. But we have to learn on this because we know that there are tensions on the market. We have the clinicians who would like this more and the others who want that more, etc. So that learning process is what is subject of these projects together with UMC. There was a very good question, but it disappeared in the meantime.
Christian?
Yes.
Yes, just to complement a bit on what you just said, I would like to add here that as industry representative, we should also not forget that all this mapping are just, I mean, way to cope with the past. As industry representative, I can say that for any future product, for any future substance, I am able to send the same data set, exactly the same data set with the same identifier for any substance everywhere in the world, everywhere to FDA, to EMA. And as soon as I get an ID, I can also submit this to UMC and say, okay, that's even if you don't have the confidential information, this is the same substance everywhere. And so to go in the direction of Peter, then there is just one way to say that's the substance, this specific matter scientifically described very precisely is this identification once and for all everywhere. Based on that, and similarly for the strengths with a strong way to express the strengths. Okay, how do we normalize the strengths? Do we go for international unit? Do we have a systematic way to describe strengths always in milliliter, always in milligrams, something like this? Let's say I just phosphorine now. Then having this very systematic way, as industry is really the originating body of all that, then we can upfront provide the PhPID and have the same one everywhere. So I fully agree there is something to do with the past, but for the future, we have a unique opportunity to set up the ground, to set up really the foundational elements to build on a very strong and solid basis. And that's why, you know me now since quite some time, I'm calling several times to include industry in these working groups where UMC, FDA, EMA is already speaking together. I think it's very important also to have industry representative to share on that, to agree on the principles, to agree on the processes. There is also some legal issues maybe to solve around that, but okay, this is stuff that can be done over time, but at least from the principle, there is really a possibility to start from a clean ground.
Thank you. I suggest, in the interest of the diversity of the discussion, that we have a brief comment on one question, which was, could you please give an example for when you can use the PhPID to identify pharmaceutical product and share between countries, or medicinal product and share between countries? Who would like to answer that? Maybe Robert van der Stichelen? You are on mute.
If I look at, for instance, the example of diclofenac, which can have 4 potential modifiers, I have in the repository, I have a PhPID for 4 modifiers of diclofenac linked to Belgian data. If you are in another country, you can look for your products with diclofenac and, for instance, identify the modifier in your in the medicinal products in your country, which is not always the case, which is not always in the summary of product characteristics, and these gaps can be explored and eventually filled so that the correct equivalent is chosen. That's what I would answer to that question.
Thank you, Robert. Any other comments? Seems not to be the case. So we are narrowing the end of this community of expertise today. Before saying thank you to everybody, I would like you also to, again, remind you on this, remind you on this questionnaire. It's very short and we really need the answers. But also I want to make you aware that by the end of this month, we have our next committee of expertise, after which we will have a short break until the month of April. So at the end of the month, we are going to speak about medicinal product dictionaries. This is part of Unicom, and it is a delivery which is in preparation, which will address the recommendation for medicinal product dictionaries. And you will easily understand that those dictionaries do exist, but how do we make them more or completely IDMP compatible? With that will be part of the discussion. It's going to be probably a little bit more interactive than we did, because we intend to use Mentimeter during the meeting. So I urge you to keep the dates. It's the Friday, the 25th, if I'm not mistaken, or 26th. But at the end of February, the last February Friday at 3 o'clock Central European time. And I think it will be a highly interesting committee of expertise once again. Because today, I hope everybody has received the information they were looking at, and that you are also encouraged to become always closer to IDMP implementation. You know a couple of stakeholders in this space. You remember Mohammed encouraged you to ask your questions to Oslo when appropriate, but you can always ask also your question to us at Unicom, and we may dispatch the questions afterwards. So without looking further at the Q&A, without looking further at the chat box, I would like to close this session. And again, thank you to the speakers, thank you to the panelists for this discussion. And I wish you with that good health and a good weekend as well. Goodbye.
Bye, and thank you, Christian.
Bye. Thanks, Richard.
Bye. Thank you.